Why people say bless you?
Like why, and I did a few videos on superstitions. I find superstitions really, really interesting, and so I think that that's an very interesting superstition, and it's worth thinking about.
Well, tell me about it. What's
Well,
the
I
what's
mean,
the origin? I mean, I
on
thought
the
people
face of
said
it
bless
has to
you
do with
because
the
it was
fact
like
that
the flu or something.
no, it had to do with the fact that you accidentally lose air, you lose spirit. That's what it is. Like just on the face of it, it's like it's superstition about the analogical relationship between soul, spirit, and breath, right? That's there in Genesis 1 already. And so when someone sneezes, then you say, bless you. Like you have to fill that gap up with spirit,
You got
like
to
with
sort
a
of
bless.
reload the spirit.
Yeah. And it sounds, I mean, obviously at the outset, when you see it, you're like, well, that's just ridiculous, right? That's nonsense. But then there's another level, which has to do with the question of accident, right? Which is the idea that a sneeze is something that is non-deliberate on your part, and because it's non-deliberate, it's it's akin to things that bring you away from meaning, and that's why you have to in some way say something like bless you. That's why we hide, like accidental like air is very embarrassing. That's why we hide our farts, we hide our burps, because they manifest a lack of alignment on your part. If you do that in public, it means you're not aligned, and so I have to realign you towards meaning. So that's the second level. Obviously, all these are related, but that most superstitions have like different levels if you see them in the right way. Like they're not completely ridiculous.
But you mean like you think this is like the origin of why people say bless you? Because the truism, the sort of factoid is that it's something to do with like, when the plague was striking people dead when somebody sneezed.
That's
It's a
part
sort
of
of
it
way of
too.
saying,
No,
I
that's
hope you're
totally
not
part
going
of
to
it.
die.
That's part of it because it all of that is also related to death. Like coughing, because it's accidental noise making, accidental like expressions of non-meaning, you could say, is related to disease. And you would say burping is the same. Like if you burp a lot, it means that you're actually not well. And so, and it's the same with flatulence. Like if you have massive flatulence, it means that you're not well. And so there's a sense in which all of these are connected in terms of human experience. But usually when something like that happens at a certain time, and then it's preserved over generations, it means there's something else going on. It can't just be an accidental thing about the plague. It has to have something more, or else why is it so sticky? And so that's why I'm interested in superstitions, is to see like why certain superstitions are so sticky rather than others that aren't. And I think that sometimes it can be accidental to a certain point, but when you've got superstitions that have lasted for like 1,000 years, then it seems like there's something sticky about them that's worth investigating. Um, and so
Yeah,
it's
maybe. I
worth
mean, I've
looking
never
at
heard
like
that before.
no, yeah,
No,
I
well,
mean
I've not heard that interpretation of sneezing at any rate. I mean,
that
I
you
kind
have to
of
see it like in other places where there is accidental, let's say accidental things, like when you have, like I said, the idea of accidental noise making. But you can analyze it. If you see sneezing and burping and farting together, and you see like all these things that you make accidental air, and how that accidental air is embarrassing or dangerous. And the thing about a sneeze is that it's very hard to contain. Even like it's the hardest one. Like if you sneeze, like if it catches you, it's difficult to stop. And so it requires an acknowledgement in some ways, and an adjustment. But this is the thing about a lot of that type of behavior. It can help us understand a lot of laws in the Old Testament. They're kind of like more like tuning forks. There's something like, if you discipline yourself regarding certain things, then you create patterns of discipline based on that apply themselves to others, right? That's why you tell a child, it's like, look them in the eye, shake their hand, have a firm grip, pay attention when someone's greeting you. And you're thinking, okay, what that's, on the outside, it looks like, okay, that's ridiculous. Or why is it a big deal? Why does it matter? But it's because you're training someone in a pattern of being that should have consequences on others, where it's like, if you pay attention to a greeting and you look the person in the eye and you remember their name and you shake their hand, then it means that you're going to attend to people in a different way. It's like a
Mm.
it's basically a training mechanism.
It's funny. I was just reading Blaise Pascal yesterday, and in his Pensée, he has a bit about sneezing, and
Oh yeah,
I just had to look it up again. He says that sneezing absorbs all the functions of the soul just as much as the sexual act. He sort of compares it to the sexual act,
yeah,
but he's talking about he's giving it as a sort of counterexample to a point he's making, where because it's involuntary, it's not sort of a sign of man's weakness in the same way that succumbing to something like the sexual act does, even though he says sneezing does consume the soul just as much as other acts, as he puts it. I must say, I mean, this is interesting. Obviously, I hope people find it interesting too. But I must say that it's got like so. I think you might have seen that I recently spoke to Jordan Peterson, our mutual friend, our friend Jordan, and one of the things that happened in that conversation was we were talking about Adam and Eve, which is what we're going to do today, and he sort of started saying that, well, the serpent represents the well-integrated woman in the family because, a woman who is well integrated will have a child. They bring in the thing that's sort of new to the relationship, and the serpent brings in something new. And he was doing this sort of analogical reading. And I thought to myself, like, fine, sure, you can read that and you can have those thoughts. But as I asked him, I thought, like, would any other person who hadn't heard your interpretation there read the story and come to the same conclusion that that was kind of what it's about? In other words, it does feel a lot like when we're sort of theologizing things like sneezing, or when we're giving a sort of interpretive account of biblical stories. I'm suspicious of this liberal approach to just sort of saying, well, like sneezing is like releasing a part of the soul because spirit is breath and you're sort of letting it go. It's kind of interesting and cool, but I mean, like how can we sort of prevent against the risk of this becoming a little bit too far-fetched and liberal when we're talking about this kind of stuff?
Well, to use the example of sneezing, for example, the analogy between spirit and breath is thousands and thousands of years old, and it's pretty universal. It's
Yeah.
in every culture. And we have different. It's actually our reality, which is a kind of aberration on that analogy, where because we're very much reductionists, then we've lost that just natural sense of the relationship between air, spirit, and breath. Like we've made spirit or soul into something that is, so completely abstracted that we struggle to see the analogies that the ancients used to make between these levels. And so I think that it's actually quite, once you start to go back into those structures, then you can see that there are these deep analogies that are there, and like I said, in Genesis 1, and that are there all through Scripture, that are there in every myth and every culture. Then it's not silly to apply them to something that has to do with meaning, and that has to do with breath, and has to do with a blessing, right? Because if I said a blessing from heaven from you, then you wouldn't squint. You would say like, well, that's normal to say that, but you always remember that heaven is the place of air, right? Heaven is the place where there's air, and so the analogy is a very natural one. But I agree that the difficulty about behavior like that is that what I'm doing is I'm not theologizing. I'm actually trying to help, or trying to peer into the reason why we remember things like that and why we continue to use them. That's a better way of understanding what it is that I'm trying to do, because we do that. And so it's like, why? And I think one of the things that you see in a lot of reductionist thinking is that we try to just say, oh, that's just superstition. That's just a superstition. Where it's like, well, superstitions need to have reasons why they're sticky, why they continue to perpetuate themselves. Like you can't just swipe it off with a hand and say, well, it's just superstition. Even if people who do it don't know why they do it, it doesn't matter. Just like people don't know why they do a lot of things, and it doesn't matter if they know it or don't know it. That's irrelevant to whether or not those, you can peer into the reason why it remains and why it's sticky. And so it's the same with the question of the Genesis story. So you can use different words, obviously, to say something like the serpent is the integration of the female. is a better way to say it, exactly than the way you say it, is to say something like the serpent is the integration of the stranger. That's a better way of saying it. And that the serpent represents that which is strange in the story. The serpent is the element of strangeness in the story. And the problem is whether or not we can integrate that strangeness. And the reason why Jordan says that it's related to Eve is because Eve is presented as Adam's opponent in the text.